Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new build video with me, Sherman. This is the first of my new series of tank builds. This is actually a stamina Sorc tank, and it is called the Barbarian. I know it sounds funny, but it is a main tank build. It is not an off tank. This is literally a main tank build, even though a lot of people might see it a little differently due to certain reasons, and we'll get to that in a minute. But, like I said, this is the first of 10 tank builds I'm working on in my new series of builds, and this is just one of 10. So I hope you guys really like it. It's taken me a long time to put together all 10 of these builds for tanking and to come up with the right gear sets, the right skill choices, all that kind of stuff to make these builds work as best as possible. So let's go ahead and get right into it. We're going to take a look at the character sheet. As you can see, 40k health, 28k stamina, 2,550 health recovery. Now, a lot of people don't build around health recovery, but this build requires it. It literally requires that extra health. As you can see, the resistances unbuffed are 24,000 and 25,000. We are running the Lady Mundus Stone for the extra resistances. I tried other things, but the Lady works the best for this build. The next one is Bound Armaments. This is a skill from the Sorc tree itself. It's from the Daedric Summoning tree, and it gives you 8% max stamina, and it also grants you minor resolve, which increases your physical resistance. Next up is the max health, max stamina food. And you want to use the dual stat food to get the higher health and stamina. You're not worried about like magic recovery or stamina recovery, because most of your resource return is done through heavy attacks with this build. If you do not do heavy attacks, it will not work effectively. The build itself has to use health recovery, again, otherwise it doesn't work effectively. So it's a requirement for this build to work this way. So going in and looking at this stuff, I know it seems out of place for a lot of people. This is a 720 CP character, so this is the max CP you can have, and it works around the idea of having 720. If you don't, I'm going to explain where you might want to put your points ahead of time to get you the best results for tanking with this build. Alright, so let's get into the gear. And when we're in the gear, I'm going to go over a few other things. Also, if you're going to use pots with this, make sure you use tri-stat pots to get health recovery, stamina recovery, and magic recovery. It doesn't help with the magic and stamina, but the health recovery definitely plays into this build really, really well. And you really want that higher health recovery when you can get it, because it really helps this build stay alive. So going into the inventory here, a little different than what most people run. But you have to remember, Sorcs get 14% reduced cost, or 15% reduced cost to ultimates, so they don't need Akabari Dragon Guard. So I'm running a 2-piece Lord Warden set for the extra resistances, and also when you take damage, you have a 50% chance to summon an orb. For 10 seconds, that also boosts your resistances by 3,870. This build is running 3 pieces infused. The 3 infused pieces are the helm, the chest, and the legs. The shoulders, the gauntlets, the belt, and the boots are all sturdy. And I'm running a medium helm with a light shoulder, so I can get the Undaunted passive. So the other set we're running is Green Pact. This gives us a lot of max health. It gives us a lot of health recovery as long as we're using a food buff. And since we're using that food buff, we get 2,500 extra health plus 250 extra health recovery. And that's why this build needs so much health recovery, is because of the way the build works. Moving on to the next set, we are running Beekeepers. We're running a 5-piece Beekeepers on both sword and board and the jewelry. And on the Beekeepers, you can see I put a health recovery on the necklace. But on the 2 jewelry pieces, ring pieces, I put weapon damage. Now you guys are going to ask me, why did you put weapon damage? I put the weapon damage there because of some of the abilities that the build uses. It kind of needs that extra oomph. We'll just put it that way. So that's why we have a little bit higher weapon damage, is because of the build itself. It kind of needs that extra oomph to make it work really good. On the main bar, we are running a Beekeeper's Sword infused with a hardening enchant. This is for when you're main tanking. Because of not having a lot of block cost, extra block cost and stuff, because of the changes to block cost, I put a hardening enchant in here, and as you can see, it gives you a 5,000 point damage shield. It lasts for 5 seconds, and then it goes away. But if you're doing taunt, and you're keeping your taunt applied, and you're doing some like light attacks or some heavy attacks, you can keep that damage shield up pretty consistently, along with the other damage shields you're going to be running. And together, you're going to have an 18k damage shield, which is going to help mitigate a lot of damage, no matter what, which is going to allow you greater chances of getting more heavy attacks in there and everything else. We'll get to that in a second. On the shields, we are running 2 Nirnhone shields. These give you overall the best resistance value of any shield in the, any shield setup in the game. So I run Nirnhone on both of these, and after thorough testing, even running a sturdy shield, it still just doesn't give you enough in block cost to make it really viable. An extra 4% isn't going to do much when you look at this. Like, these give you 4, that's 8, 12, 16% more block cost, plus some of the passives we're running and stuff. So, both Sword and Shield, though. And the reason I run Sword and Shield and not like Mace and Shield or Axe and Shield is I just like the appearance. So that is it for the gear. As you can see, the resistance value, though, is really good. We're going to go ahead and buff up just so you guys can see the resistances. When you're buffed, you have 30k physical and 30k spell, almost. And when you get that Shadow Ward, it puts you over the cap, just barely over the cap, which is really, really good. And it's really effective for when you're tanking in a trial or in a dungeon. So this is trial ready, okay? It's not just trial viable, it is actually trial ready. So it's a really effective build. I set it up this way to be both. So we're going to go take a look at the skills now and go through them as quickly as possible. So we're going to start with the class skills, just so you guys can see what I have unlocked. I unlocked all the passives. I also unlocked Dark Deal as an extra skill to have on the bar. If you need a little bit of extra resource management and stuff, this is something you're going to want to use as you unlock other abilities. So as you're unlocking other abilities and leveling the character, Dark Deal is going to be one that you're going to want to use to keep your resource pool in check until you get the right champion points. Once you get the right champion points placed, then you don't need Dark Deal anymore. On the next part, Daedric Summoning, we have all the passives unlocked, and we only have one skill unlocked from here, and that's Bound Armaments. But as you're progressing through the game, you might want to unlock Volatile Familiar and unlock the Clan Fear. This is going to give you some extra physical damage. Not a whole lot because it's based on Max Magicka, so it's not going to be really good for you to use for a long period of time, but it is something that you can use to level this tree and help you get to the point where you have Bound Armaments, because Bound Armaments is your main source. As you can see, this increases your max stamina by 8%, and it also increases the damage of your heavy attacks by 11%. This is a really, really hard-hitting heavy attack tank, and it can really bring in some extra damage for the group. That's why the build is built this way. So, as you can see, again, all passives here, and the only ability you really need from here is Hurricane and Critical Surge. Now, you're going to start with Mage's Fury on your bar as you're progressing, but unlock Hurricane. As soon as you get a Hurricane, drop the Mage's Fury. You don't need it anymore. Just get this morph, or get this Lightning form, and then morph it into Hurricane, because this is going to be your overall resistance buff. But it also increases in damage, so it's a nice tick of damage for your tank to apply some extra damage and stuff like that. If you don't want to run this, though, you can run the armor, heavy armor, immovable, and I would suggest, if you do, run Unstoppable. This gives you brief immunity from knockbacks and disabling effects for 5 seconds. Run this one, it's going to be a lot better for you. So on to the other things. We are running Sword and Shield. Unlock all passives and all the skills. Not the ultimate, just the skills. And make sure you take them in this order. Take Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, make sure you get Absorb Magic, Shielded Assault, and Reverberating Bash. This build plays on all those skills. It utilizes all of them all the time. So you want to keep that up, or keep it consistent with this build. Make sure you unlock all the passives on this, and then when it comes to your armor passives, your light armor, you want to make sure you get the top 3 to the light armor and make sure you max them out. So Recovery, Evocation, and Spell Warding. It's mainly for the Spell Warding, but Evocation helps as well because it gives you 2% reduced cost in your magic abilities. You are using a few magic abilities. In fact, I think you're only using one. So getting that 2% reduced cost on that magic ability really helps. And then that 4% recovery rate on your magicka kind of helps a little. Medium armor, definitely need this. You want this. You need that little bit of extra crit just to give you a little boost, so that way you can crit a little bit more often. Next up, Windwalker. This is definitely a must-have because of the reduced cost and stamina abilities by 2%. Moving on to the bottom bar, we have Athletics. This is going to increase your movement speed from sprinting by 3%. While wearing multiple pieces of medium armor, you get 3%, but you also get that 4% reduced roll dodge cost, and that can play on your character as well, especially with champion points. Moving on to Heavy Armor. All heavy armor passives, you want them all maxed out because of the build. Moving on to world skills. Now, you don't really need any of these, but Soul Magic, Soul Summons, really good because this will give you a chance to revive every hour without a soul gem. So that way you're not wasting soul gems. And then this one gives you a 10% chance to automatically fill a soul gem. So that's a benefit to the player to have this. So that way if you have a bunch of empty soul gems, you can fill them, and they're not sitting in your inventory just taking up space. Moving on to the Fighters Guild, you want Flawless Dawnbreaker. Okay, and I'll explain why in a minute, but you definitely want to get Flawless Dawnbreaker for the weapon damage only, not for the ability unless you're playing solo. Then it's nice to have that extra little bit, but you definitely want it for the weapon damage itself, and I'll explain why in a minute. So moving on down here, we have Intimidating Presence. This basically is a thing that you can get for some things, but it's basically to reduce the cost of your Fighters Guild abilities by 15%. It doesn't affect Flawless Dawnbreaker, but it does affect the other abilities if you have them. And make sure you get Slayer and you get this. These are the two that you really want from this. Banish the Wicked. You generate 9 ultimate when you kill an undead, Daedra, or werewolf. Most content in the game has Daedra, undead, and werewolf, so it's a good way to build ultimate a little faster. This one here increases your weapon damage for each fighter guild skill slotted. The Dawnbreaker is on your back bar. It's there for a reason, and I'll get to that, but it's also for that 3% more damage. That's why you have it. Mage's Guild, you just need pass a Persuasive Will on this, and that's it. But that's only mainly for quests. Moving on to Undaunted, you want to make sure you unlock Inner Beast. This is a stamina taunt morph. You want the stamina version, not the magicka version. The reason you want the stamina version because this is a stamina build. It plays off of stamina. Anything that you use that's magicka can really affect the playstyle of this build, and you don't want a lot of that. So having this is a lot better. Next up, we have Spiked Bone Shield. Now, the reason we're running Spiked Bone Shield is because it creates a good damage absorption shield. It does 36% of your max health because of your champion points, but it also returns 37% of any melee attacks against you. So it'll absorb the damage and then redistribute it back to the enemies at 37%. It helps redirect some of that extra damage. And even if you're blocking with the Bone Shield, you still can get Reposit to activate, which is a champion passive. We'll get to that in a second. Make sure you unlock both Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal. Undaunted Command is a must-have. As you can see, whenever you use the Synergy, you get 4% of your max stats back. So you get 1,764 health, 1,129 stamina, and 524 magicka. You're going to want to synergize sometimes with like off necrotic orbs, spear shards, other things, so you can get those resources back if you're struggling with resources. On to the next one. You're going to only unlock 2 assault skills, Aggressive Warhorn and Resolving Vigor. Resolving Vigor is just a way, like if you're solo playing, you can drop this and you can put Resolving Vigor in its place, but do not take this off your bar. If you're main tanking, do not take this off your bar ever. Moving on, make sure you unlock all your racial passives. This is a Nord, Nord works the best for this particular build. I've tried multiple other races, including Argonian. Argonian just doesn't have what it takes. The Nord and the Orc are actually the best for this because of two things. They both get really good health recovery. This one gets 6% max stamina, but it also gets 9% max health. The Orc only gets 6% max stamina and health, but it does get 20% health recovery, and it gets 4% extra damage on its melee attacks. Not as effective as you would think with this build, but this is why you need this. You need the Nord. The 6% damage reduction. Now, this is a multiplier, but it gives you 6% of your total damage reduction. So whatever your total damage reduction is, it will give you 6% more. So that's why you really need this. You want that extra 6%. Even though it's not going to be much, it's still going to be something that's going to add to that damage reduction for this build. On to the crafting. It's up to you if you want to craft. So, but that's it for that. Now we're going to go over the skill bars and show you guys why this build works the way it does. So on the main bar, we're running Shielded Assault. Well, the reason we're running Shielded Assault with that hardening enchant on the bar is so that way you get the extra damage shield when you initially attack your boss encounter or your enemies in a dungeon. You get that initial pop of damage shield. It's a 10k damage shield together with this, so it's a really effective thing to have. So you get, like I said, a 10k damage shield. And then if you pop Bone Shield right afterward, or Taunt and then Bone Shield, you'll have like a 20-something K damage shield for a little while. And then you can maintain those two damage shields pretty easily between the Sword and Board and the Bone Shield. So the next one is Pierce Armor. Pierce Armor is your thing that's going to reduce the enemy's physical and spell resistance with Minor Breach and Minor Fracture. It also does a nice chunk of damage. Not a whole lot. It's really cheap in stamina, which makes it really good for a tank. But it's that idea of, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to taunt this guy, but I also want to help bring a little bit more to the group than just 2k damage. I want to bring a little bit more. This allows you to really do that. Next up is Spike Bone Shield again. The main reason why we're using Spike Bone Shield is because of the damage shield and that redirecting damage back to the enemy. But we're also using it for a synergy, an extra synergy for the group. And when the group synergizes off of it, it grants the ally and up to 3 others in the friendly targets in the area a damage shield that absorbs 120% of their max health for 6 seconds. So it gives them a nice damage shield if they need it. Because you can recast this. As you can see, it's not super expensive. 3,516 is pretty cheap. And you can keep it up pretty good, especially with a 28k stamina and a return of a lot on heavy attacks. Next up, we have Absorb Magic. You're not going to be casting this a whole lot. It's mainly for the 8% increased block costs, like reduced block cost, and the 8% increased reduced damage. Sorcs don't get 10% extra reduced damage like DKs do. This really plays well with a Sorc, so they can get a little bit more extra damage mitigation from their blocks. Now, Sorcs do take extra damage, and here is, when we get to the back bar, you'll see why we run this build the way we do. Is because of all the benefits that it's going to get in survivability. So, next up we have Bound Armaments. This is super, super important. You need that 8% max stamina, and you need that 11% damage from your heavy attacks. To make this build really shine, you really want that. The Minor Ward, or Minor Resolve, also helps because of physical resistance. This makes you more tankier against axes, because it's consistent, it doesn't drop off, you can tank them, and you get that extra physical resistance. And so you can tank them a lot better. Next up we have Aggressive Warhorn. This is just for group buffs, but it also affects you, and it affects you in a really good way. It increases your max stamina, which you don't really need. It increases your max magicka, which you don't need. But you need that max stamina, and that 10% puts you at 30k almost. And then with Minor Toughness, you go up to almost 43k. You go up to 43k max health, which is really good. The other nice thing is it gives you the increased critical damage by 15%. Now, this does apply to you as well, but your crit's so low that it's going to be hard for this to be really effective for you. but don't worry about it, because if you do happen to get a crit, you're going to see that increased damage to your character, which overall applies to the group. Moving on to the back bar. The back bar is where the bread and butter of this build really, really shines through. So the first skill you're going to have on your bar is Reverberating Bosch. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, this is a PvP skill. It can work in PvE as well. There's a lot of encounters that have a lot of healing going on, and this can help in those encounters by reducing the healing received. As you can see, it does do a small chunk of damage, not a whole lot, but it does do a decent amount. And it stuns the enemy for 3 seconds. So it will apply that to them, and they will get that immunity, but it affects only like certain trash mobs. It doesn't affect every mob in the game, but it does affect their healing no matter what. So even bosses, it affects their healing. It applies that Major Defile. And that Major Defile is what this skill is all about, is that and the stun. So you're really able to control the fight a little bit better. Now, you can take a few other abilities if you want to and put it into place, like you can go to Dark Magic and get Encase, and if you do use Encase, use Shattering Prison. Do not use Restraining Prison, even though it's a little bit better. It's not as effective as Shattering Prison. Shattering Prison is a lot better because it does explode and does damage. So it's a really good one, and it can lock down multiple enemies. So if you want to trade this out for the Sword and Shield Reverb Bash for dungeon play, that's fine. Do that. That's up to you. But I would suggest sticking with either this or Reverberating Bash most of the time. On to the next one, we have Heroic Slash. This is your ultimate gen. This is going to allow you to generate more ultimate. It's going to allow you to apply Minor Maim against a single target. And so don't go spamming this. This is mainly for boss encounters. So when you're fighting a boss, you want to keep this applied to that boss. You can use it on trash fights and stuff if you know how to manage your resources with this build. Next up is Critical Surge. This is like one of the big bread and butter things of this build. You want to get that Major Brutality, which increases your weapon damage by 20% for 33 seconds. While active, dealing a critical strike heals you for 3,300 health. This effect can occur once every second. You want this ability. You need that Major Brutality not just for the weapon damage, but mainly you want this ability for the critical strike heals. That's also going to help you keep your survivability up. With that high health recovery and these critical heals coming in, that's 5k you're going to get every second. You're going to get 3,000 every second possibly, and 5k every 2 seconds. So that's what you really need this build for, why you have the higher health recovery, why you use this ability. Moving on to the next one is Hurricane. This is what grants you Major Ward and Major Resolve, but as you can see, it creates a hurricane around your character, which expands out to 9 meters in size. It lasts 15 seconds, so you do need to keep this casted every 15 seconds. But it does a nice amount of damage, and it's how you're going to keep your crit surge damage healing you. Moving on to the next one, we have Bound Armaments again. You guys know we have this. And then Dawnbreaker. Now remember when I told you guys like increasing your weapon damage is important for this build because of certain things? When you increase your weapon damage, it increases the effect of things like Critical Surge as heal, because it's considered a magic ability, but the heal itself is considered a stamina heal. It's kind of weird, but it does. So it doesn't affect that 3,300 by a small amount. But it's also to boost this weapon, or this thing's ability damage as well. That's 681. You want to get it boosted. So you're going to use Crit Surge. And if you go in here now, it's 730. So it's just a little bit more damage. And if this crits, it hits for over 1,000 damage. So it's like, it's really, you want to keep that up as much as possible. So that's it for the skills. We're going to take a look at the champion points. And like I said, I'm going to go through the champion points. I'm going to tell you what I would start with in each tree, and then I'm going to go through and explain why I have the points set up the way I do. So we're going to start with the red tree, and where you want to start with the red tree is start with Hardy and Elemental Defender. As a tank, when you first start unlocking CP, start putting into these two like religiously, like right off the bat. You want to put into these two. When you get to 160 CP, you won't have a lot of points into these yet, but don't worry. Keep adding to these until you get them both to 43. After that, focus on Bastion. And the reason you want to focus on Bastion is to increase the effect of your damage shields. Focus on Bastion. Once you get your damage shields done, then you can focus into things like Ironclad, Thick Skin, and then Expert Defender, then the last little bit into Quick Recovery. So, we have 37 points on the Ironclad to give us 15% reduced cost in our direct damage we take. So, this helps, and being a Nord, like I said, that's an extra 6% multiplied into that, and multiplied into Hardy, which is going to give you a 25% damage mitigation. With that 6%, it actually takes you up to 28% damage reduction. So that's why you want those things. You want that extra, almost 30% damage reduction. So we have 37 points in here. We have 37 into Thick Skin. This is going to reduce the damage you take from damage over time effects. So if you get hit with, like, say, poison, dot, that kind of thing, any damage over time, it's going to reduce that by 15%. This also stacks with Hardy and Elemental Defender, just like this stacks with Hardy and Elemental Defender. So it's a good way to mitigate damage. And that right there is, like I said, 28% with the Nord. Because the Nord gets 6% to all damage reduction. So it multiplies into both of these together. So it's like it'll multiply 6% of this, 6% of this. So together it adds up. Next up, we have 56 in the Bastion. And the reason we have 56 in the Bastion is we have 43 in the Hardy and Elemental Defender for 10% damage mitigation. This reduces physical poison and disease. This reduces flame, frost, shock, and magic. So as you can see, you really need these two mainly at the start, and that's wise because they affect every kind of damage type. Alright, now 56 in the Bastion. The reason you want 56 in the Bastion is you want this 20% increase in those damage shields. Otherwise, they do not work as well. So that 20% really boosts your survivability even as a tank. So, gives you really good effect there. Next, you want 16 into Expert Defender. This reduces the damage you take from light and heavy attacks by 10%. This light and heavy attack damage stacks with Hardy or Ironclad, and then with Hardy and Elemental Expert. Most light and heavy attacks are direct damage. And NPCs in the game, or non-player characters, or any of the mobs in the game, do a lot of light and heavy attacks. So this helps you mitigate a lot of that damage a lot better, and gives you greater survivability. We have 8 points in here, giving us 2.35% healing received. Don't really need it, but heavy armor gives us 8% healing received, so that 2% makes it 10%. So it increases that healing received by just a little bit, increases the effect of healing applied against us, which is really good. So moving on to the next one, we have 23 in the Warlord. This reduces the cost of break free by 10%. I would suggest not putting anything into here right away. The places you're going to want to focus when you first start off is Tenacity and Health Recovery. Those are the two you're going to want to focus on as this kind of tank. Because you're going to need that health recovery, and you're going to need that tenacity to increase your return amount on your heavy attacks. And that's how this build plays. So you need those two things really high. So focus with those, and then once you're done focusing with those, then put into Shadow Ward. Then you can focus on this other stuff. So 23 in here, 10% break free cost, saves you stamina. That's what it's all about, saving stamina. It's not a lot, but it's enough to make a difference. Same thing with bashing focus. It's not a lot, but it makes a difference when you bash with your shield. So, moving on to this, Tenacity, 75 points. You want that 14% extra stamina return from your heavy attacks, so you can keep consistency of resource return. Next up, you want 10% or 43 in here to give you 10% health recovery. This stacks with all the other health recovery you get. If you guys didn't know, Sorcs get extra health recovery. I'll be going over that in a second and why it's important to play a health recovery build with a Sorc. Moving on, 56 in the Shadow Ward. This increases or reduces our block cost by 20%. This stacks with the 4 pieces of Sturdy, which is 16%. So 16 plus 20 plus the 36 you get from the Sword and Shield passive. That's a lot of block cost reduction. And you have such a high stamina pool, you make up the difference. Like, okay, I got higher stamina, I don't need as much block cost because I have the resources to block more. We have 23 into tumbling. This reduces the cost of our dodge roll by 10%. It really helps when you have, that 10%, because that also goes with that 4% from that medium armor passive, making it a 14% reduced cost. This is why you want that. So, 4 points into here, Befoul. This also increases the effect of your healing reduction abilities, like Major Defile on Reverb Bash. Really saves you some resources. Moving on to the blue tree. Always, as a tank, start in the middle, and start with Physical Weapon Expert. A lot of people will say, well, start with this, Blessed. You're not going to be using a lot of heals right away, so Physical Weapon Expert is going to be a lot better for you, because it's going to allow you to build up your weapon damage from your light and heavy attacks. Tanks focus a lot on light and heavy attack damage because they don't utilize a lot of other abilities. Off tanks can actually go into other things they don't need as much in a Physical Weapon Expert or Master in Arms. Tanks do. Tanks need it because they need retaliation. When you block a heavy attack, your next light attack, with it used within 7 seconds, deals 30% more damage, which is really consistent with increasing your damage output. That 30% does stack with this 20% and this 15%. So you will get 30, 50, 45, or 65% increase in your damage. And that's why it's really important. Next, we also get Reposit, and as you can see, you get a 15% chance to deal 4,440 physical damage to the enemy. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. Now, I want to show you something here. Oops, I just needed to pop Critical Surge. If you look at the blue tree now, and we mouse over this, Reposit actually goes up in damage because of increased weapon damage. So, you want to be blocking on either the back bar where you're blocking, so you can get that higher damage increase, or you want to be blocking on the front bar so you can get the other benefits of the 8% damage reduction and the 8% block cost. But you still want it for Reposit. Reposit's just an extra amount of damage being supplied to the enemy. Tanks don't do a lot of damage, but this way you can add to your damage. With this many points as you have in this tree, you can also unlock Butcher, which increases the damage done of your light and heavy attacks by 5% when the enemy's below 25% health. This boosts your damage. As a tank, it's important to focal most of your stuff into this tree, because most of your damage comes from light and heavy attacks. Your abilities are to apply effect. That's it. This helps you maintain that extra damage. We put 23 points into Shattering Blows, and the only reason why I do this is because I do play PvP, but I also play a lot of PvE, and there's a lot of dungeon encounters that do utilize damage shields. This allows you to do damage through those shields to help your group do damage. That's it. So moving back over here, you want 43 into Bless. This increases the healing that you do by 10%. Now remember, because you're wearing 5 pieces of heavy armor, you get 8% plus the 2% from the champion points, making it 10% healing received. So not only do you get 10% more healing done, you also get 10% more healing received. So it boosts your heals, which is really good. You really want those higher heals. Moving over to this tree, don't focus onto this tree until the end, until the very end. Focus here first, then here, then focus on this. And you're going to want to put 43 points into Mighty. This increases your physical, poison, and disease damage done by 10%. Any light and heavy attacks you do that could crit are also boosted by another 20% because of this. And this increases the damage and healing of your critical strikes and stamina abilities by 20%. This you need. Because you want that extra damage. You can take the leftover points and just dump it into piercing. This increases your physical penetration by 312, increasing your damage potential, possibly by an extra amount. So since I didn't mention this, I'm going to go back and let you guys know, on the back bar you are running a Crusher enchant, but you're not on the back bar enough to keep it consistent. And the reason you're not on the back bar enough to keep it consistent is because your main focus is staying on this bar. It's staying on the front bar. Because of all the changes that came in with this update, we need to start, we have to change some things about the meta, and the meta definitely calls for a Crusher enchant on a tank, but because of the reduced cost of block, damage shield's going to be a lot better for tanks to run, just saying. So that's why I run a hardening enchant on the main bar, and on the back bar I run a crusher enchant. I know I'm not going to be able to keep this up consistently, but that's okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you guys a little bit about this build in action on a test skeleton, just so you guys can see. So what you're going to mainly want to do is start with Hurricane, Crit Surge, and then Critical Rush, Taunt, Bone Shield, Heavy Attack. And the reason you're heavy attacking is because you want to get those resources back. So just keep those resources coming in. And this is for while you're main tanking. You can still hold block, and you can even bash, see? And it does a decent amount of damage, especially when it procs. Now, you also get all that extra damage from using this and this. And if you watch, you can see how many times you crit. That's one crit. And you don't crit that much, but it's enough to keep that healing that you do from your crit surge coming in, and it works out really, really well with this build. And like I said, I've tried a lot of builds, different ideas for this build, and a lot of the ideas I tried just didn't work. This setup works the best. Green Pact and Beekeeper works really good for this build. Now, the reason I mentioned the thing about the Sorc earlier is because of their Daedric Summoning. If you go down here to Power Stone, it reduces the cost of your ultimates by 15%. This is going to make your Warhorn cost 213 instead of the other. You also get Rebate, which you restore Magicka when one of your Daedric Summoning pets is killed, which you don't need, but Daedric Summoning, or Protection, is the one you really want. Increases your health and stamina recovery by 20% while you have a Daedric Summoning ability slotted. This is why we don't build into stamina recovery, is because we want it for the health recovery. If you're playing a stamina DPS, you want to build into it for the stam thing. But in order to have this, you have to have bound armaments on your bar. So you have to have this on both bars to keep that 20% health recovery and that 20% stamina recovery. Now, you can make a stamina recovery tank with this, but it's a little bit different, but it still works. So, but definitely make sure that when you set this build up, you set it up this way. And other races do work. The Nord works, the Orc works, and the Khajiit works with this build really good. Each of them offer something different. The Khajiit offers more critical rating, which does help. They just don't get the max health and max stamina that the Nord or the Orc get. So they will have a lower health pool, and they will have a lower stamina pool, but not by a major degree. If you're playing an Orc, you do get the 4% weapon damage or melee damage. So that helps with your Reverb Bash, your Low Slash, your light and heavy attacks. It helps with all of that. But the Nord works the best for this build because of the damage reduction. And other races can work. You can do this with any race in the game. You can play this build with any race in the game. It's just they're not going to have as good of health recovery, they're not going to have as good damage reduction, and they're not going to have as good survivability that this build offers the way it works. But that is it for the Barbarian, the first of 10 classes coming out. The next class build that's coming out is another Sorc tank. It is the redesigned Tesla tank. And that will be coming out later today as of the recording of this video. So keep an eye out for that one. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you guys like this video, hit that like button. If you guys want to see more build videos by me or other videos by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.